The investigation continues into the deaths of 39 people found in a truck in the UK. Prosecutors say they were victims of a global ring of human traffickers. By now we know they came from Asia. We don't know much more. You may remember that early reports said they might be Chinese. Next, they might be Vietnamese. Asia is where much of modern slavery in the world takes place. Almost 25 million people in Asia are victims of slavery. That's 6 for every 1,000. 66% of them go into forced labor. And India, China, and Pakistan have the highest absolute numbers of slaves, but Southeast Asia sees a lot of activity. Poor job prospects, natural disasters, and military conflicts there are all factors behind waves of displaced people and migrants. For more, we have Rachel Smith with the Human Trafficking Foundation with us. Rachel, tell us what you know about human trafficking to the UK from Asia. Let's start with China. That's where investigators were looking at from the beginning.
Well, as you've just said, Melissa, in most cases, people are trafficked because they have an existing vulnerability. And we find from Asia and specifically from China that many people will be suffering poverty in their homes, and especially when you see in countries like China with such economic inequality, you often find those poorer communities coming to the UK on the promise of a better life. And that is often on a promise from traffickers who give false promises of better work prospects, of having their immigration sorted out. And then once they arrive in the UK, they find a very different circumstance. We find people from China often, when they come to the UK, are exploited in forced prostitution or sometimes in restaurants or other kind of forced labour and factories as well. And this will look like someone withholding perhaps their ID documents or telling them that if they go to the authorities, then they're only going to get arrested and deported. And for many, the prospect of returning, it might be that they've come running from loan sharks, for example, in the first place. And so that's a very fearful prospect for them. And many are in fear of their own lives, really, if they do return. So the means of control can often be that forced with withdrawing of documents and immigration rights, or a fear of their return. That's often what we see.
Yeah, and Rachel, then for Vietnam, because that's where a lot of people are looking at right now. There's a lot of news in the UK suggesting that these people had come from Vietnam. Do they do different kind of work once they arrive in the UK? And why are they leaving Vietnam? Same reasons?
Often vulnerabilities are similar. We actually find with Vietnam, most people come here are exploited in cannabis farms or nail bars. They're the most common forms of exploitation. And in fact, in 2018, there were 702 Vietnamese nationals identified as being trafficked into the UK and referred for support. But unfortunately, we find the expected figures are much higher. We find usually it's criminal exploitation in cannabis farms and nail bars, and often it is again on the promise of the false promise of a better life.
Right.
And some people, they travel from Vietnam and have positive experiences coming to the UK, and I think people come with those similar expectations and then that they've been deceived.
So this is a big international business, isn't it? Human trafficking.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about numbers? Do we have a sense, or is it all just too dark and underground?
It's certainly very difficult to get an exact, accurate number, but a recent figure by the ILO in partnership with the charity called the Walk Free Foundation estimated there were 40.3 million people in slavery worldwide at any given time, and that includes human trafficking. And it's also the second most lucrative illegal industry in the world, behind drug trafficking alone. And often what people like to explain this is that, an item can be sold once, but a human being can be sold multiple times over and over. And so it's unfortunately very profitable and highly lucrative for criminals seeking to exploit people.
Rachel Smith, thank you.